On the afternoon of October 14th, 2002, Marcus Webb was the fastest runner Millbrook High School had ever seen. The 17-year-old track star had already broken 3 state records, and college scouts from across the country were watching his every move. That day, during what should have been a routine practice session, Marcus ran his final lap around the school's quarter-mile track and simply vanished into thin air. No scream, no struggle, no body. His teammates watched him round the eastern curve, his form perfect, his stride effortless. When they looked again, just seconds later, the track was empty. Marcus Webb had disappeared as completely as if he'd never existed at all. For 16 years, his family held onto hope. The police investigation went cold within months. The media moved on to newer tragedies. But Marcus's mother kept his room exactly as he'd left it, his track shoes still muddy from that final practice, his stopwatch frozen at 3:47:22. Then, in the spring of 2018, something impossible happened. A hiker in the Appalachian foothills, nearly 200 miles from Millbrook, discovered that same stopwatch, Marcus's stopwatch, engraved with his initials, lying in the center of an abandoned logging road. And it was running. The digital display showed 3:47:23, 3:47:24, 3:47:25, as if 16 years had passed in a single second, and time itself had finally caught up. What happened to Marcus Webb in those missing seconds? And where had he been for 16 years? This is the story of a vanishing that defies explanation, and a mystery that refuses to stay buried. If this already has you hooked, hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell, because this case only gets stranger from here. Marcus Webb wasn't supposed to be a runner at all. Born in the humid summer of 1985 in Millbrook, Georgia, a town of barely 4,000 people tucked between pine forests and red clay hills, Marcus grew up in a modest house on Sycamore Street with his mother, Diana, and his younger sister, Keisha. His father had left when Marcus was 7, and Diana worked double shifts at the county hospital to keep the family afloat. By all accounts, Marcus was a quiet kid. He earned decent grades, helped his mother around the house, and spent most of his free time reading science fiction novels in the town's small library. He wasn't athletic. He wasn't particularly social. In a town where football was religion and Friday night games were community gatherings, Marcus was invisible. Everything changed in the spring of his sophomore year. During a mandatory fitness test in gym class, the teacher, Coach Raymond Mills, noticed something unusual. While other students jogged half-heartedly around the track, Marcus ran with an almost unconscious grace. His breathing was steady. His posture was natural. And when Coach Mills checked his time, he had to look twice at his stopwatch. Marcus had run a mile in 4 minutes and 47 seconds. For context, the average 15-year-old boy runs a mile in around 8 minutes. Elite high school runners might hit 5.5 minutes. Marcus, who had never trained, never competed, never even considered himself an athlete, had just run a time that would qualify him for state championships. Coach Mills pulled Marcus aside after class. "Son," he said, "do you have any idea what you just did?" Marcus shrugged. "I just ran." "No," Coach Mills said quietly. "You flew." Within a week, Marcus was on the track team. Within a month, he was breaking school records. Within a year, he was breaking state records. But what made Marcus truly remarkable wasn't just his speed. It was the way he ran. Other athletes strained, grimaced, pushed their bodies to the limit. Marcus looked serene, almost meditative, as if running wasn't effort, but release, as if some part of him was trying to outrun something invisible and desperate. His mother noticed it too. "Baby, what are you running from?" she asked him once, watching him pace their small backyard after dinner, restless and distracted. Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I don't know, Mama. I just feel like if I stop, something's going to catch up to me." Diana Webb dismissed it as teenage drama. the normal anxiety of a boy under pressure. But years later, after everything that happened, she would remember those words with a chill that never quite left her bones. By the fall of his senior year, October 2002, Marcus Webb was a legend in Georgia high school athletics. College recruiters from Stanford, UCLA, and Penn State were offering full scholarships. Nike was interested in sponsorship deals. Local newspapers ran profiles calling him the Millbrook Meteor and Georgia's Golden Boy. But Marcus himself seemed increasingly distant, as if the attention and accolades were happening to someone else. His best friend, Terrell Jackson, later told investigators that Marcus had been having strange dreams of running through endless forests, of being chased by something he could never quite see, of a voice calling his name from somewhere far away. He told me he kept waking up exhausted, Terrell said in his police statement, like he'd been running all night, like his body knew something his mind didn't. On the morning of October 14th, 2002, Marcus woke before dawn. His mother heard him in the kitchen, and when she came downstairs, she found him staring out the window at the dark street, his track shoes already laced. "Practice isn't until 3:30, Diana said. "It's 5 in the morning, baby." Marcus turned to her, and for just a moment, she saw something in his face. Fear, maybe, or recognition, as if he'd just remembered something he'd been trying to forget. "I know, Mama," he said softly. "I just wanted to see the sunrise. One more time." October 14th, 2002 was a perfect autumn afternoon in Millbrook. The temperature hovered around 72 degrees. The sky was cloudless, that deep October blue that makes everything feel crisp and possible. The Millbrook High Track team gathered at the school's stadium at 3:15 p.m. for their regular Monday practice, a light session, mostly cool-down runs and technique work, nothing strenuous. Marcus arrived exactly on time, carrying his duffel bag and the silver stopwatch his mother had given him for his 17th birthday. It was a nice piece, engraved with his initials on the back, MJW, Run Like the Wind. 12 teammates and 2 coaches were present that afternoon. Every single one of them would later give statements to police, and every statement told the same impossible story. Practice began with warm-up stretches at 3:30 p.m. Coach Mills gathered the team for a brief talk about the upcoming regional championships, emphasizing rest and recovery. Then he sent them out for an easy 3-mile run, 12 laps around the quarter-mile track. Marcus started his stopwatch at exactly 3:47:22 p.m. The team spread out naturally, faster runners pulling ahead, slower ones settling into comfortable paces. Marcus, as always, found his rhythm quickly. He ran alone, as he often did, several paces ahead of the next fastest runner. Terrell Jackson, running in the middle of the pack, watched Marcus round the first turn of the track's eastern curve. The track itself was standard, a red clay oval surrounded by chain-link fence on one side and a line of old oak trees on the other. Beyond the trees was an empty field, then the parking lot. No place to hide, no place to go. "I saw him hit that turn," Terrell later told investigators. "His form was perfect, like always. He was about 40 meters ahead of the rest of us. I looked down to check my own pace for maybe 3-4 seconds. When I looked up, he was gone." At first, no one panicked. Runners assumed Marcus had simply pulled so far ahead that he'd rounded the next turn and was out of sight. But when the lead pack completed their lap and found no sign of him, confusion turned to concern. Coach Mills blew his whistle, stopping practice. The team did a quick head count. Marcus Webb was missing. "We checked everywhere," assistant coach Patricia Dennison told police. "The bleachers, the equipment shed, the locker rooms, the bathrooms. We searched the woods beyond the track. We called his name until our throats were raw." It was like he'd evaporated. At 4:15 p.m., Coach Mills called the police. At 4:47 p.m., Diana Webb received the phone call that every parent dreads. "Your son is missing." By sunset, the Millbrook police had established a perimeter around the school. Search and rescue teams arrived with dogs. Volunteers from the community spread through the surrounding woods with flashlights, calling Marcus's name into the gathering darkness. They found nothing. No footprints leading off the track, no signs of struggle, no abandoned clothing or personal items. The only thing Marcus had left behind was the silence of his absence, and the question no one could answer. Where does a boy vanish to when a dozen witnesses see him run into empty air? The police investigation moved quickly at first. They interviewed every student, every coach, every person who'd been on school grounds that afternoon. They checked security cameras, but Millbrook High's outdated system only covered the main building entrances, not the athletic fields. They examined the track itself, looking for sinkholes, drainage tunnels, anything that might explain a sudden disappearance. Nothing. Detective Sarah Hartley, the lead investigator, would later describe the case as the most frustrating of her career. There were no variables, she said in a 2010 interview. No window of time where Marcus could have slipped away unseen. No opportunity for abduction. The physics of it just doesn't work. You can't vanish from the center of a track field while 12 people are watching, and yet that's exactly what happened. The search continued for 3 weeks. Divers checked the nearby reservoir. Ground-penetrating radar scanned the school property. Psychics and dowsers and well-meaning crackpots called with tips that led nowhere. The FBI briefly joined the investigation, suspecting kidnapping, but found no evidence of foul play. Marcus Webb had simply ceased to exist. By Thanksgiving, the official search was scaled back. By Christmas, it was quietly closed. Marcus was classified as a missing person. His case added to a database of thousands of unsolved disappearances. Diana Webb never gave up. She kept Marcus's bedroom exactly as he'd left it. Posters of Michael Johnson and Carl Lewis on the walls, a half-read copy of Ender's Game on the nightstand, his track trophies gathering dust on the shelf. And on his desk, still plugged into the wall, sat his silver stopwatch, its display frozen forever at 3:47:22. Until 16 years later, when it started ticking again. Emily Chen wasn't looking for anything in particular on the morning of April 7th, 2018. The 29-year-old environmental scientist was conducting a routine survey of old-growth forest in the southern Appalachian foothills, about 190 miles northeast of Millbrook. The area she was mapping had once been active logging territory in the 1950s and 60s, but had been abandoned for decades, reclaimed slowly by kudzu and pine. Emily was documenting tree growth patterns along a forgotten logging road when something caught her eye, a glint of metal in the center of the overgrown path, partially buried in moss and fallen leaves. She almost walked past it, but something made her stop, crouch down, and brush the debris away. It was a stopwatch. Silver, digital, surprisingly clean despite being in the woods. And it was running. Emily picked it up, confused. The display showed a time, 3:47:23, 3:47:24, 3:47:25, counting upward steadily. She turned it over and saw the engraving on the back, MJW, Run Like the Wind. She had no idea who MJW was, but something about finding an active stopwatch in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest trail, felt deeply wrong. Emily photographed it, logged its GPS coordinates, and took it back to her field station. That evening, she posted about the discovery on a regional hiking forum, hoping someone might recognize it. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, someone had identified the initials. Within a day, the post had been shared thousands of times. By the end of the week, a journalist from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution had connected the dots and published a story with a headline that gripped the entire state. Missing runner's stopwatch, found after 16 years, still counting. Diana Webb learned about it from a phone call at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. "Mrs. Webb," the voice said, "this is Detective Hartley. I need you to sit down. We found something that belonged to Marcus." Diana didn't remember sitting. She didn't remember much of the conversation at all, just fragments, Stopwatch. Still running. Appalachian foothills. I don't understand. Is he alive? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. There was a long pause. We don't know, Detective Hartley said. But we're reopening the investigation. The stopwatch was authenticated within days. The serial number matched. The engraving was unmistakably Diana's handwriting. Forensic analysis confirmed no signs of tampering. The device had been running continuously since October 14th, 2002, but that should have been impossible. According to the manufacturer, the stopwatch model Marcus owned had a battery life of approximately 18 months under continuous use. Even with a fresh battery, it should have died by early 2004. Yet, here it was, still running 16 years later, found nearly 200 miles from where Marcus had disappeared. The discovery raised more questions than it answered. How had the stopwatch traveled such a distance? Why was it found on an abandoned logging road that hadn't been used in decades? And, most haunting of all, how was it still running? Detective Hartley, now nearing retirement, threw herself back into the case. She organized a new search of the area where the stopwatch was found, bringing in cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, and a team of forensic anthropologists. They found nothing. No human remains, no campsite, no evidence anyone had been in that area recently, except for Emily Chen herself. But there was something odd about the location. Emily pointed it out during the search. The trees here are different, she said, gesturing to a rough circle about 20 feet in diameter where the stopwatch had been found. They're younger, like something cleared this area maybe 15, 20 years ago, and it's only recently started growing back. Detective Hartley knelt and examined the soil. It was darker here, richer, as if something organic had decomposed and enriched the earth. But there were no bones, no fragments, no remains. Just that circle of newer growth and the stopwatch that had waited 16 years to be found. The media seized on the story with renewed intensity. News crews descended on Millbrook. True crime podcasts devoted episodes to Marcus's case. Online sleuths developed elaborate theories, government experiments, dimensional portals, alien abduction, time slips. But Diana Webb just wanted answers. She drove to the location where the stopwatch was found, stood in that strange circle of younger trees, and tried to feel some connection to her missing son. "Are you here, baby?" she whispered to the forest. "Can you hear me?" The trees whispered back, but said nothing she could understand. As the investigation into Marcus Webb's disappearance reopened with renewed intensity, researchers began digging into the history of the area where the stopwatch was found, and what they discovered was deeply unsettling. The logging road where Emily Chen made her discovery had once been part of a larger operation run by the Cascade Timber Company from 1947 to 1962. The operation was shut down abruptly after a series of accidents and unexplained incidents that left 3 workers dead and several others refusing to return to the site. Dr. James Whitmore, a folklorist at the University of Georgia, uncovered references to the area in local historical records. The Cherokee had names for these mountains, he explained in an interview. One particular valley was called Adamski, the place where people get lost. They avoided it. And later, when European settlers arrived, they reported similar phenomena. In an 1889 journal entry from a surveyor named Thomas Pritchard, there's a chilling account. "We attempted to map the valley northeast of Miller's Ridge, but found our instruments behaving strangely. Compasses spun without pattern. 3 men swore they heard voices calling their names from the woods. By nightfall, we had somehow traveled in a circle, returning to our starting point despite walking steadily east for hours. I do not know what dwells in that place, but I know we will not return." The Cascade Timber Company records, stored in county archives, told a similar story. In 1951, a logger named Robert Hayes vanished during his shift. His crew insisted he'd been working on a tree just out of sight, and when they went to check on him minutes later, he was gone. His tools were left behind, still warm, A search found no trace of him. In 1958, 2 workers reported seeing a man in old-fashioned clothes walking through the logging site at dawn, but when they approached him, he vanished, like smoke. They quit the same day. The final incident in 1962 was never officially explained. Company documents only note that operations were suspended indefinitely due to safety concerns after an incident on August 14th. Whatever happened that day was serious enough to close a profitable operation permanently. But perhaps most disturbing were the stories that locals refused to tell on record. Teresa Matthews, a 78-year-old woman who'd grown up near the logging area, would only speak to reporters off camera. "My grandmother told me things," she said quietly. "She said there are places in these mountains where time gets tangled, where the past and present touch. She said if you're in the wrong place at the wrong moment, you might slip through, fall into a crack in the world. And if you do, you might come back, but you might not come back when you left." Was this superstition, folk legend, or something more? Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a physicist at Georgia Tech, offered a more scientific, though no less unsettling, perspective when asked about the case. "Look, I'm not saying I believe in time anomalies or dimensional rifts," she said carefully, "but quantum mechanics tells us that time isn't as fixed as we perceive it. There are theoretical models, Einstein-Rosen bridges, closed time-like curves, that suggest time could, under extreme circumstances, loop back on itself or create isolated pockets where temporal flow behaves differently." She paused, then added, "If, and this is a huge if, there were some kind of localized temporal anomaly, you might see exactly what happened here. An object that vanishes from one point in space-time and reappears in another, possibly at the same physical location but displaced geographically due to geological drift, continental movement, or the rotation of the Earth itself over 16 years. In other words," the interviewer asked, "are you saying Marcus Webb might have been caught in some kind of time slip?" Dr. Warren chose her words carefully. "I'm saying the evidence, a stopwatch that apparently ran continuously for 16 years on an 18-month battery, found nearly 200 miles from where it disappeared, is inconsistent with our understanding of normal causality. Either the stopwatch is a hoax or something very strange happened to it. And if it's not a hoax, then we need to seriously reconsider what's possible." The stopwatch was tested extensively. Multiple laboratories confirmed it was authentic, unaltered, and had indeed been manufactured in 2002. The battery inside was original, showing signs of age and use, but somehow still functional. One technician noted something odd. The battery chemistry is degraded in a way that's consistent with 16 years of continuous use, but the electrical output is stable, as if some external source has been supplementing it, keeping it alive. Back in Millbrook, Marcus's disappearance took on new dimensions. People began remembering strange details they'd dismissed at the time. A janitor reported that, on the day Marcus vanished, all the clocks in the gym had stopped at exactly 3:47 p.m. They'd assumed it was a power glitch, but the main building hadn't lost power. A student remembered seeing heat shimmer near the track that afternoon, like the air was rippling, even though the day wasn't especially hot. And Terrell Jackson, Marcus's best friend, remembered something Marcus had said the week before he disappeared. "I had this dream where I was running, but I wasn't going forward. I was running in place, and everything around me was moving, like the world was a treadmill, and I was the only thing standing still." Detective Hartley compiled all of this into a growing file of impossibilities. She'd been a detective for 23 years. She believed in evidence, in logic, in explanations that made sense, but this case was different. "I've worked murders, kidnappings, cases with no bodies and no witnesses," she said. "But I've never worked a case where the evidence actively contradicts reality. Marcus Webb, vanished from a place he couldn't vanish from. His stopwatch ran on a battery that should have died 14 years ago, and it was found in a location with a documented history of people vanishing. She paused, staring at the map on her wall. Red pins marking Millbrook High School and the Appalachian logging road, connected by a straight line that meant nothing and everything. "I don't know what happened to Marcus," she said quietly. "But I know it wasn't normal. And I know he's not the first." As spring turned to summer in 2018, the case of Marcus Webb became something larger than a single disappearance. It became a mirror reflecting dozens of similar incidents that had been dismissed, forgotten, or explained away. True crime researchers began compiling lists. Online forums filled with stories, and a pattern emerged, faint but undeniable. Between 1889 and 2018, at least 17 people had vanished in the general region of the southern Appalachians under circumstances that defied conventional explanation. All of them disappeared outdoors, in daylight, often while engaged in repetitive motion, walking, working, running. Most were never found. 3 had reappeared. In 1923, a mail carrier named Henry Dobbs vanished on his route through Fannin County. His mailbag was found in the middle of a road. Letters scattered as if he'd simply dissolved mid-step. 4 years later, a farmer reported seeing a confused man in an outdated postal uniform wandering near the same area. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. In 1967, a 10-year-old girl named Sarah Kimball disappeared during a family picnic in the Chattahoochee National Forest. Her parents turned away for seconds, literally seconds, and she was gone. 6 hours later, she reappeared in the same spot, confused and upset, insisting that no time had passed. She remembered nothing of the missing hours. Years later, as an adult, Sarah would only say, "I was somewhere else, somewhere the sun didn't move." And in 1994, a surveyor named Michael Ortiz vanished while mapping property lines in Murray County. His equipment was found undisturbed, his truck still running, but Michael was gone. 3 days later, he stumbled out of the woods, dehydrated and disoriented, claiming he'd only been gone for minutes. His watch had stopped. So had the digital recorder he'd been using, stopped at the exact moment he'd disappeared. Were these cases related? Was there really some anomaly in these mountains? Some crack in the world where people slipped through? Dr. Whitmore, the folklorist, believed there might be a simpler explanation. Not simple as in normal, but simple as in human. "Think about what all these cases have in common," he said. "Repetitive motion, trance-like states. That's when the mind is most susceptible to altered consciousness, to experiencing time differently. Maybe it's not the place that's strange. Maybe it's the interaction between the human mind and certain environmental conditions that creates the phenomenon." But that didn't explain the stopwatch. That didn't explain the battery that refused to die. Diana Webb, meanwhile, was living in a strange limbo between grief and hope. The discovery of the stopwatch had reopened wounds she'd spent 16 years learning to live with. Now, every day brought the possibility of news, of closure, of answers, or of more painful questions. She returned to the Appalachian site repeatedly, sometimes with investigators, sometimes alone. She walked that circle of younger trees, felt the peculiar stillness of the place, searched for any sign of her son. In June, she brought Keisha with her, Marcus's younger sister, now a 30-year-old teacher with children of her own. "Do you feel anything?" Diana asked as they stood in the clearing. Keisha was quiet for a long time, then shook her head. "Just absence, Mama. Just the space where something should be." But that night, Keisha had a dream. She dreamed of Marcus running, not in terror, not in panic, but with that same serene expression he'd always had. He was running through a forest that looked familiar and alien at once, where the light never changed and the trees seemed to move when you weren't looking at them. And he was trying to tell her something, mouthing words she couldn't hear, pointing to something behind her that she was afraid to turn and see. She woke with tears on her face and a single thought. He's still running. The investigation eventually reached another dead end. Despite the renewed searches, despite the attention and resources poured into the case, no new physical evidence emerged. The stopwatch remained an impossible artifact, a message from nowhere, a clock that shouldn't be running. In August, Detective Hartley officially retired. Her last case unsolved. "I'm sorry," she told Diana at her retirement party, an awkward gathering at the Millbrook police station. "I wanted to bring him home to you." Diana squeezed her hand. "You did everything you could. Some mysteries don't have endings." But Diana didn't believe that. She couldn't afford to believe that. She kept the stopwatch now, in a small glass case on her mantel. She'd watch it sometimes in the evenings, watch the numbers tick upward. Each second, another moment her son had been gone. Another second of his life that had passed somewhere else, doing something she couldn't imagine. 347:23 had become 503:385:47, 500,000 minutes, 11,000 hours, 16 years, and still counting. Sometimes, late at night, Diana would hear phantom footfalls on the track behind Millbrook High School. She'd go to her window and look out at the empty field, the silent track, the trees swaying in darkness. And she'd imagine Marcus still running there, caught in some eternal lap, unable to stop, unable to finish, forever trapped in the moment between 3:47:22 and 3:47:23. Time is supposed to be linear, past, present, future, one second after another, orderly and inevitable. But what if it isn't? What if there are places where it pools and eddies, where it slips sideways, where a boy can run out of one moment and not arrive in the next? What if Marcus Webb didn't vanish at all, but simply got lost in the space between seconds and is still trying to find his way home? There are no endings to some stories, only pauses, only silences that stretch into years and decades, only questions that echo unanswered. Marcus Webb has been missing for 23 years as of 2025. He would be 40 years old now. Diana Webb is 71, her hair silver, her hope worn thin but never quite extinguished. She still lives in the house on Sycamore Street. Marcus's room is still preserved, though the posters have faded and the trophies have tarnished. The stopwatch is still running, still counting. As if somewhere, somehow, Marcus Webb's final practice run has never ended. The case remains officially open, though no active investigation continues. It sits in the cold case files of the Millbrook Police Department, a folder of impossibilities that no one knows how to solve. But every few years, something happens. In 2020, a jogger in the Appalachian foothills reported seeing a young black man in old-style running clothes on a trail near where the stopwatch was found. The figure was there for a moment, then gone. The jogger insisted it wasn't a trick of the light. The man had been solid, real, and had looked directly at him before vanishing. In 2022, a wildfire burned through part of the area. When it was contained and investigators surveyed the damage, they found that the circle where Emily Chen had discovered the stopwatch was completely untouched. The fire had burned around it in a perfect ring, leaving the center pristine. And in 2024, on October 14th, exactly 22 years after Marcus's disappearance, every clock in Millbrook High School stopped at 3:47 p.m. Teachers reported it to the principal as a technical glitch. It took 3 hours for the clocks to start running again. No one could explain why. Detective Hartley, now fully retired and living in Florida, still thinks about the case. "It breaks every rule," she said in a recent interview. But maybe that's the point. Maybe there are phenomena in this world that don't follow rules, that exist in the gaps of our understanding. Marcus Webb stepped into one of those gaps. And maybe he's still there, in the space between seconds, running forever. Dr. Whitmore, the folklorist, has written a book about disappearances in the Appalachians. He dedicates a chapter to Marcus. These stories serve a purpose. he writes. They remind us that the world is stranger and older than we acknowledge. They remind us that there are still mysteries, still places where our explanations fail and our certainty crumbles. Emily Chen, who found the stopwatch, moved away from Georgia in 2019. But she still thinks about that morning, that glint of metal in the moss, that moment when she held time itself in her hand. I feel like I was meant to find it, she said. Like Marcus wanted someone to know he was still out there, still trying to come home. Terrell Jackson, Marcus's best friend, named his son Marcus. The boy is 16 now, the same age Marcus was when he vanished. Sometimes Terrell takes him to the track at Millbrook High, tells him stories about the fastest runner Georgia had ever seen, about the boy who ran into mystery and never ran out. What do you think happened to him? Young Marcus asks. Terrell is quiet, staring at the track where his friend disappeared. I think he's still running, he says finally. I think somewhere, in some place we can't see, he's still running, and maybe one day he'll cross the finish line and come home. Keisha, Marcus's sister, visits her mother every Sunday. They sit together on the porch, drinking sweet tea, watching the afternoon light slant through the Georgia pines. Neither of them talks about Marcus much anymore. There's nothing left to say that hasn't been said 1,000 times, but sometimes when the wind shifts just right, Diana lifts her head and listens. You hear that? She asks. Keisha listens. Just the wind, Mama. But Diana shakes her head. No, footsteps. On the track. I hear them sometimes. Keisha doesn't tell her mother it's impossible. She doesn't tell her it's grief or hope or the mind playing tricks. Because sometimes, late at night in her own house, Keisha hears them too. Steady, rhythmic, the sound of someone running, never stopping, never tiring, chasing or fleeing something that exists only in the space between heartbeats. The stopwatch sits on Diana's mantle, counting upward. 203, 503, 385 seconds and counting. 23 years, 6 months, 24 days and counting. The numbers climb steadily, relentlessly, marking time that has passed and time that hasn't, time that flows forward and time that stands still. And somewhere, in these mountains, in this world, or in some place that exists parallel to both, Marcus Webb might still be running, trying to finish a lap that has no end, trying to return to a starting line that disappeared 23 years ago. Some questions don't have answers. Some mysteries resist all attempts at solution. But perhaps that's not the point. Perhaps the point is the mystery itself, the reminder that for all our science and certainty, the world still holds spaces where logic fails and reality bends. Marcus Webb vanished during practice in 2002. His stopwatch started ticking again in 2018. And between those two impossibilities lies the truth, that time is not what we think it is, that distance is not what we measure it to be, and that some people who disappear aren't gone. They're just lost in the silence between moments, waiting for time to catch up. If you're still listening to this, if you're still thinking about Marcus Webb and the track where he vanished, remember this. Pay attention to the places where you feel time move strangely. Notice the moments when seconds stretch too long or collapse too quickly. Because the world has cracks in it. Spaces between the seconds, places where the past and present touch. And if you're not careful, if you're running too fast, dreaming too deeply, listening too closely, you might slip through, just like Marcus did. And your own stopwatch might be the only thing that ever finds its way home.